Welcome to Gabriel Prod, where today we are going to see another cool thing in Unity, more specifically with VFX Graph. And as you have guessed by now, it's some cool loot drop effects. And it can be used as a way to highlight an item in a scenario, and it's very commonly used in RPGs or in a game like Borderlands where you have tons and tons of loot drops. So I played around with this idea, made a few variations for fun and mostly for my patrons. But this is the one I'm going to show you how to create from scratch. The others are exclusively available on my Patreon page and on my website gabrielaguiarprod.com. Links in the description. So without further ado, let's jump right into it and let's see how to create loot effects. Quick side note, I think it's worth mentioning I'm using Unity 2020.1 in URP, and in Package Manager I have installed VFX Graph. It's also worth mentioning that I used a lot of texts from an amazing pack that 8-Bit Assault offered me, and it's really a must-have if you want to speed up your effects creations. I left a link in the description to his Gumroad page. Now, to start with a new effect, we can right-click in a folder of the project and go to Visual Effects section and choose Visual Effect Graph. We can rename it and then drag and drop to the scene. And let's go ahead and press on the Edit button so VFX Graph opens up. We can duck it right here, make some room, and press F to focus on the particle system. And we are going to start by creating a glow. So we don't need velocity. Let's remove this module because this texture is going to be static. We also only want 1 for the rate. What we don't need is randomness in the lifetime, so in the inspector let's turn it off and set it to 2 seconds. Now down here we can go ahead and use the default particle texture that comes with Unity and everyone has. Like I said, I highly recommend you to check out the textures by 8-Bit Assault. I left a link in the description, they are super useful. And then we can set the blend mode to additive, so it becomes brighter. Right, so as you can see it's really small, and if you want to scale this up, we can use a set size node, drag it down here and set the size to something like 6 for now. We can also make the fade in and fade out of the color of a lifetime smoother. And as you may notice, the set size of lifetime is not working. Let's drag it down here after the set size and set the composition to multiply. We don't want to overwrite any previous value. We want to multiply the size with this curve, more specifically with this one that I created. So it kind of wiggles, so it kind of shakes a bit. Right, that's looking nice. But we need a few more things for the loot drop effect. For example, let's imagine that our loot would be a sphere. I'm going to create one and then create an empty game object so we can parent the VFX graph and sphere to that empty game object. Right, and this is going to be our loot drop tutorials in this case. And sphere is going to be our loot object. And you will see why this is useful to have a sphere as a reference. For now, let's go ahead and add a color property. Since we are going to create several levels of loot value, we will need different colors. But let's start with white color and let's drag it down here. As you can see, set color over lifetime, it's a gradient, so we need set color only. And then we can connect the color 01, but the color will not work because the set color of a lifetime is set to overwrite. It will overwrite any previous value and we don't want that, so let's set it to multiply. And now you can choose any color you want and it will work just fine. But since this is level 1, I'm gonna leave it at white. Now another thing I like to do is create a texture 2D. And for example, this is going to be the first texture, texture01 underscore glow. It's going to be for the glow. And connect it to the main texture of our output particle quad. And this will allow for higher customization options throughout different levels of the loot. I'm going to choose the default one and let's go ahead and group this. It's going to be a group selection and call it glow. And we can copy and paste it. But this one is going to be for the glow on the ground. Glow ground should be fine. You can also use a projector, by the way, if you have uneven ground. For this to be parallel to the ground, we need to set the orient mode to look at position and set the Y to 1. But since everything is at a ground level, we can't really notice the glow on the ground. So what we can do is push the loot object up in the Y, 1 should be enough. And we also want to control the height of the loot effect. So I'm going to add set position node and then create a float. And connect it to the Y axis of the set position. And set the default value to 1. This way we can control how high the loot effect is going to be. Just going to increase the size of the glow on the ground to 8. Alright, that's looking nice. If you notice that the glow on the ground is too bright, we can multiply the color 01 by 0.5 and it will be half of the original values and it will look less bright if you want. However, I'm not going to use it. Now, last thing we need for our level 1 loot drop is some particles. So let's copy again the glow, rename it to particles floating. And the first thing we can change is the set lifetime. We can set it to random, uniform random, between 0.6 and 1.2. And we don't want to set position because the particles are going to spawn in a sphere position. So let's remove this one and search for position sphere. And we can connect the height to the y-axis of the center of the sphere. Just like this. Let's also create a float so we can have control over the particles rate. And for this level 1, I'm gonna set it to 5 only. A level 1 loot drop effect is for a common object, something usual. We don't need many tricks. Another thing that we want to set to random is the size. We want it to be between 0.1 and 0.4. And in this case, we don't need this curve in the size of lifetime. We can use this one, which will make the particles shrink and shrink over their lifetime. Alright, we are starting to see something, which is nice. Let's just add some motion to the particles, and there's several ways to do it, but let's use a conform to sphere. Basically, these particles will try to fit inside this sphere, and what we want to do is offset the center of this sphere, multiply it by the height, and connect it to the y-axis. Maybe decrease the radius. As you may notice, the attraction speed, if it is low, the particles will calmly try to fit to the sphere. 5, they move faster. I'm gonna leave it at 1. The only thing I'm gonna change then is the stick force. 50 is too much, 10 is enough. We don't want the particles to be trying to stick too strongly to the sphere. And lastly, we can add velocity, so they go a little bit up in the y-axis, like 0.01. A very tiny small value. Nice, this is looking great. And it's a fantastic start for a loot drop level 1. For the level 2, let me just create another empty game object for the level 01 and then shrink the loot object to 0.8 and duplicate it for the level 2. Right, so the level 2, now we can do a few different things. Just gonna move it to the side. For example, we can change the color to a green. And also increase the particles rate. By the way, with VFX Graph, we can directly shrink down the scale and it will automatically update the size of the particles and the speed of the particles, everything. So for the level 01, I'm actually going to scale it down to 0.8 and then adjust the height to something like 1.2 or 1.5. 1.5 is too much. Right, so we have 2 levels. Let's go ahead and already create the level 3. Just gonna move it to the side. And for this one, I'm going to choose a bluish color. This is a rare item, basically. So let's also increase the particles rate. Maybe decrease the particles rate of the level 2 to 30. And shrink it just a little bit down to 0.9, as well as the loot object. And for example, we can also make the level 03 a little bit brighter with the intensity of the color. And in turn also decrease the intensity of the level 2 color to something like -0.2. But as you can see, we need a new element so we can distinguish which one is more valuable than the other. So let's go ahead and copy the glow particle system, copy and paste it, the group, and this is going to be for a flare. For this tutorial I'm going to keep using the text01 glow, and for this flare we need to set the scale, where the composition is going to be multiplied because we don't want to overwrite any previous value, and in the y-axis let's set it to 0.2. And as you can see, this applies automatically to the other levels. Maybe increase a little bit the flare in the x. For now let's go ahead and create another float for the flare rate, which we are going to connect up here, and we are going to leave it at 0, because now in our level 03 LUT we can set the flare rate to 1 or to 2. Yeah, 2 it is too much, but 1 is enough. Let's also go ahead and create a vector tree so we can control the scale of our flare. And connect it down here. Now, this will allow us, for example, to set the x of the flare size of the level 03 to 1.3, and then, for example, we can say that the flare rate of the level 02 is going to be 0.5, a very small number, just appears from time to time, but it's going to be much smaller, like 0.1 in the y and 1 in the x. It's just an extra touch, so you can still distinguish which one is more valuable than the other. Now, another thing that would be useful to us is to control the speed of the particles. You can control anything you want. I'm just selecting a few parameters that I think are useful. So let's go ahead and create a new float, this time for the particles up speed, with a default value of 0.01, and this is going to be connected right here to the y of the add velocity module of the particles floating. And it's useful because, for example, in our level 03 now we can say it's 0.03, the particles up speed. For the level 2 it's going to be 0.012. This way the blue one looks bigger and more valuable. For the level 4 we are going to duplicate the level 3 and then change the color to something epic. So a purple color fits really well. And if we increase the scale to 1.1 in all axes, as well as the object to 1.1, we can now make it brighter like 0.8, and also increase a little bit the flare size, but we are limited to the existing element. So we need a new element, and this time we need Blender. It's a very simple mesh. If you open up Blender you can delete everything, create a cylinder, open up a new window for the UVs, and in edit mode we want to delete the top and the bottom faces, and in the UV we need to push this vertex down here. You can turn on constraint to image bound so it doesn't go below the UV area. With Ctrl R create a new edge loop in the middle, and then shrink the top and the bottom vertex like this until you create more or less this shape. And then if you want you can add a few more edge loops, something more or less like this. In the end you can use shade smooth so you don't have these faces, which doesn't look that good. And that's basically the mesh you need. And you can directly save this blend file to your Unity project. And then, once again, we will need to copy the glow particle system. And this time it's going to be for the circle mesh. We can remove this texture and create another texture 2D. And I'm going to select one of the many textures that comes in 8-bit Assault package. I'm going to select this one right here. And oh yeah, actually we can delete this output particle quad because we want to output a mesh and not a quad. So let's delete this, and with spacebar let's search for mesh and select output particle mesh. Connect it like this. And now it seems like there's nothing there, but if we add a set size module, increase it to 1, you will see that the capsule is there. We want to replace this mesh, this capsule, with the circle we created in Blender, this one. And let's go ahead and rotate it. So let's use a set angle, and in the x-axis, rotate it 90 degrees. Great, looking nice. But first, let's actually create a circle mesh rate, because as you can see, this applies automatically to the level 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and connect it right here. And then we can also create another float to control the size of this circle mesh. Right, and now we can connect the texture. Now, there's a bunch of things we can do, but I think the simplest one is to add angle in the update particle. In this case, it's going to keep on rotating the particle 0.1 in the Y. That's too low. 15 it's too high. Something maybe like 1 in the Y-axis. It's going to keep rotating the circle mesh around that axis. Now, to control the color, let's use a set color node. And if you want, you can create a new color property, color02, and connect it down here. Don't forget to set the alpha to 100. And for the circle mesh to fade out, we also need the set color of a lifetime module, which once again, the composition is going to be to multiply. And we can also change the blend mode to additive so it becomes a little bit brighter. Okay, it's starting to look nice, and it's going to be really useful for our level 4 loot drop. Let's go ahead and set the circle mesh rate to 0 in the first level, as well as in level 2 of our drop, and in our level 3 we can also set it to 0, and let's focus on our level 4. So let's choose a color. This one seems appropriate. I'm gonna scale down the circle mesh to 0.8 and set the circle mesh rate to 2. That seems nice for now. Let's move on to level 5. Duplicate level 4, rename it to level 5. For the legendary level, let's choose a goldish color. Something orange, something yellow. This is a very special item, don't forget that. Let's also increase the particles rate to 120. Oh, and let's also increase the whole VFX graph to 1.2. Yeah, now that I noticed the level 4, the circle is a little bit too big. So 0.5 seems okay. And I'm gonna leave the 0.8 to the level 5. I'm gonna brighten this up a little bit. Maybe. Yeah, maybe that's too much. Anyway, moving on. Let's increase a little bit the flare size and the particles up speed to 0.05. Now, most importantly, we still need to distinguish the level 5 from the level 4, besides the color and the amount of particles. One way we can do it is, for example, to add velocity in the update particle only in the y-axis, something super small like 0.01, maybe even smaller. Anyway, down here we also want to add a set size of our life. Choose any curve for now. What is important is that you set the composition to multiply. It's going crazy right now, as you can see. I'm going to decrease the y velocity of the add velocity. Yeah, 0.01 seems like a good value. Now let's go ahead and create a float so we can have control over this velocity in the inspector. Circle mesh up speed with a default value of 0.001 and connect it to the y-axis of the add velocity. Now, another small detail that I find really awesome in VFX Graph is that you can create an animation curve property. And this allows to control the circle mesh size curve. If we set this to a default curve of always 1, the level 4 will not go up. Let's connect it right here to multiply size of a life. So level 4, as you can see, it's going up, and I think that's something it should be only available in level 5. So I'm going to set the circle mesh up speed to 0. And for the level 5, before we choose the curve, we can increase the rate to 4 and the up speed to 15. And then we can use this curve right here and push the last key a little bit up. Maybe increase the up speed even more to 0.002, and that's starting to look more unique, more legendary. For example, just out of curiosity, if you want to do something crazy, add another set angle in the initialized particle, and if you set it to random, between 360 and minus 360, you will get some really crazy motion for your circles, as you can see. So yeah, there's plenty of things that you can play with. But I'm going to make sure it only changes the rotation in the z-axis when this circle mesh is instantiated. Yeah, I'm going to change the color as well of the circles, but basically, as you can see, we have created 5 levels of loot drops, each one with its unique feature, and with these techniques I've shown you, you can even add more elements and you can even create different loot drops, which is what I have done, and I had quite some fun doing it. If you have enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe and leave a like as well. And if you really want to get your hands in all of the loot drop effects I have created, you can go to my Patreon page or to my site gabrielaguiarprod.com. Everything is available there, and these videos would be a lot harder to do if I didn't have the support of my patrons, so a big thank you goes to all of you. And as usual, a special shout out to the super mega patrons, to the top tier patrons, which are David Crew, Donny Trona, Goblin Plague, Imarias PC, Hostile Mars Game, Josh McCormick, Kojo Apuni, Lars Martin, Leon Cheng Chen, Mirko Zilbert, Pandora Toolbox, Reganado, TK, Toothless Webbed, Victor Nathan, VR Pal, Yong Chin, and to Yukio Karoto. I'm sorry if I pronounced any of your names wrong. You guys are really awesome and your support has really been a blessing, and it keeps me going so I can bring videos like these to this channel. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you to anyone who watched this. I hope you have enjoyed, and I really hope to see you in the next video.